Hey there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make this stylish and sassy card, and what I love is that you can make it for whatever occasion you need. This video is sponsored by Bienyo. They are the makers of wonderful, affordable art supplies, and we're going to use their set of 72 classic markers today, and they are going to be on special on a lightning deal on Amazon this week, so I'll put the details for that in the video description. I'm starting off by stamping these Simplicity pattern ladies onto white Neenah cardstock. Now, I wasn't that crazy about how my stamping was going, honestly, and then that last one I stamped, I messed up the elbow. So since I wasn't happy with how it was stamping to begin, I decided I would condition my stamps. And this is really important to do when you have less expensive clear stamps, like from the craft store. These were from Inkadinkado, and they're like 10 bucks so for the set. So they're not the highest quality, but just by rubbing it with the eraser, you'll get a much more solid line and a much better result. So don't skip that set. When you get a new set of stamps, wash them, rub them with an eraser if they're the cheap silicone kind, and they're going to perform so much better for you. So here you can see the set of 72 Bienyo markers I'm going to use to color this image, and this set actually comes with a hand color chart. It's got a chart that's printed and then one you can color in. Although I will say I recommend testing your colors or making your own chart on marker paper or the paper you usually use, because the when companies come out and they put the hand-colored charts in the bag, it is such a time saver, but often the paper they need to use is like a laser printer paper, something that they can reproduce colors on as well. So it's not typically what you're going to use for your craft and coloring paper. So it's always a good idea to make a chart with the paper that you normally use. Now, the thing I like about these markers for coloring stamped images is that there's a broad point and also a bullet point. And I try to use the broad point anytime I need to color in a large area, like I did with that pale pink on the lady's dress here. But then I can go in with a bullet point when I want to put those darker shadows in, or if I want to get close to an edge. The other thing I like about the bullet point is that it puts out less ink, so if I'm doing a tiny detail, I know I'm not going to flood the paper with ink like I might if I had a brush tip marker. So these are really handy for stampers and other artists that like to work smaller. Of course, brush tip markers are lovely. Bienyo does make beautiful brush tip markers, but they are a lot more expensive. They're about double the price. So if you're on a budget and you're mainly a stamper, I would seriously consider getting the ones with the bullet tips, because it's, you know, like half the price. So what I did after I put in my darkest colors, I went in with a medium color and then a lighter color. I wanted the fabric to look a little like crinkly, so I didn't try to blend too much. I wanted to kind of keep that structure of the fullness and the crinkliness of the skirt. And what's wonderful about markers is you can do whatever colors you want and you can make everything match, and that's so fun. Now this set has really nice colors for pale skin tones, but it is a little challenging with darker skin tones, which you'll see in a moment here. I'm using kind of a darker, I would say kind of like a tan color, maybe like a sand color, to do this, the shadows, and then I'm blending it out with a really, really pale color called baby pink, I believe, or baby skin white, something like that. So I was able to go and do a really easy fair skin tone with those two colors. If you find that it's a challenge to blend on your cardstock, if you color it all with the paler color and then go in with a shadow and then go over where the lines meet with your paler color, you will have an easier time blending. Also, if I'm going to do like blush, I will generally do the blush and the shadows and then go over it all with my palest color, just to help things blend in and look a little bit more natural. These stamps are small, so and they might even, if you see the size of my hand there, you can see how small those stamped images are. So you just want to be careful you don't flood the paper. So when I was doing this, and this is where I wanted to mention how much your color can vary from coloring it on a glossy coated cardstock versus a uncoated cardstock. Her skin was really dark. The color I intended to do for the base color was just much too dark, so I had to skip to a lighter color. Otherwise it just showed up super dark brown, and I wanted a little lighter of a color so I'd get a little bit more variation and I would be able to see the features on her face. So on my coated color chart it looked fine, but when I colored it on my Neenah cardstock, it definitely sucked up more pigment, more ink, and it was difficult to see. Now with yellows, because yellows are really easy to blend, I just went in with my dark first, then my medium, and then my light. I didn't need to prime the area because I knew the colors like warm. It seems like warmer colors seem to blend a lot easier. Browns, oranges, yellows, warm greens. Those colors all seem to be really easy to blend, whereas colors like bright reds, purples, bright blues tend to be more difficult to blend. And that's funny, I never really thought of it before as like warm colors blending easier and cool colors blending more difficultly, but definitely it does seem to be if the undertones on a color are cool, it's tougher to blend, and if an undertone on a color is warm, it just seems to want to sit on top of the paper and puddle a little bit and give you that like little grace period to get your coloring done. Don't you just love these ladies? Oh my gosh, I just absolutely love those fashion poses. I love old vintage pattern packets, and these are like simplicity vintage pattern designs that are in this stamp set. When I saw them at the craft store, I was like, oh, I've got to have it. I don't care that these are like probably not the best quality stamps. But I just love the design so much. And there's nothing wrong with silicone stamps. It's just you gotta, you might want to use a pigment ink instead of a dye ink. But I wanted to use a dye ink because I'm going to be coloring here with alcohol markers. And if I used a pigment ink, they might smudge a bit. So you want to match your inks to your markers, even if that ink doesn't give you the best results on the stamp. Now there are probably some hybrid inks I could have used if I had the right color. I didn't have a black hybrid ink, so if you do and you're using that stamp set, I would highly recommend it. Now here I'm actually using like a warm gray 3, I think, for the shadow on this lady's skin, because I wanted her to have not quite so fair of skin. I wanted it to be a little bit darker. And I do find that if I use warm grays, I can use those as undertones and shadows on skin, and it doesn't look odd. So there's another way to stretch your supplies a little bit if you're working with a limited supply. Now with alcohol markers, it does seem like you need a lot of colors to be able to get those blends that you want. This is a set of 72. That's quite a few colors, but there's definitely going to be gaps. So using your warm grays for skin tones to deepen colors and darken colors and shadow, using cool grays on in other aspects, like if I wanted to shadow this dress and I didn't have a darker blue, I could go in with some of those cooler grays and it would look fine. I wanted to get a little richer color, and I did have a few shades of blue, so I went with that, but it's definitely an option that you have. So don't forget about those grays if you're coloring with a limited palette. Now here you can see I'm using that bullet tip to get around the edge because I don't want to flood my stamped image and have my ink bleed out. So even though I was covering a fairly big area, I used the bullet tip because I already had a base layer of color down and I didn't want it to flood out. But here, if I want to blend, I'll go in with that broad tip, that chisel tip, and I will just color over everything with my lightest color. And that's going to help. Keep that ink wet and help it like just kind of soften where colors meet. So my best advice, if you're new to coloring with alcohol markers, if you're new to stamping, is just to play with the supplies, because you are going to learn so much more by grabbing those markers and using them and not being afraid than you will by watching a million videos. You really have to put the time in. I think that's where people get frustrated with alcohol markers. It's that there's such a learning curve, and I think there's a little bit more of a learning curve when you're working with a bullet chisel combination versus a brush chisel combination, and these are a bullet chisel combination, but the savings on those markers are so great. Now this color was really difficult to blend because like most sets of markers, especially if you're looking at a set that's like under 120 colors, there's not very many purple shades. So when you're doing purples, you could use a gray. This purple had a lot of pink in it, so I didn't want to really use a gray, but that would have been an applicable situation. I decided that I would try some of the other mauves and purples that I had to see if I could get a nice transition color in there. This was almost like periwinkle blue color that I thought was kind of nice because it was almost like a grayed down purpley blue. So I did use that around the edges, and then I just kind of went in with that lighter color and just tried to force it out to a blend. I think purple is the most difficult color to blend, so that's just something you might want to practice on some scrap paper or practice your combinations before you jump right in and start working on your main subject like I did. Something else that I'm going to show you in a second that is a really good tip if you are working with a limited supply is to make yourself a little palette, and you can do that on a like an acrylic stamping block, or you could do it on a white ceramic plate. I do like to use a white ceramic plate or tile for this, and you'll see that in just a minute, because I can see the color a lot better. So if you are going to use an acrylic block or, you know, maybe some clear packaging that you have lying around for your palette, put a piece of white paper underneath it so you'll be able to see it. I didn't realize I spent so much time working on this before I got to that process. So as you can clearly see, I did not get that soft blend that I wanted. So I've just got a little ceramic dish here and I'm scribbling out a few shades of purple that I have in my biennial set. I knew I didn't have exactly the shade I wanted, but I knew I could mix it if I used my marker as a brush and my plate as a palette here. So as you can see, I'm using my lightest shade of violet that I had base coated her dress in, and I'm picking up a few other colors, mixing them together on the plate and using that bullet tip as a brush to pull that color and bring it over to the dress. And you can already see that I'm getting a much nicer transition, and it looks like I was able to pull from 5 or 6 different markers there, and I did it just with that plate. I wish I thought of that when I first started, because I would have gotten a much smoother look, and especially on that edge right at her waist and hip right next to where I'm coloring now, I would have had a nicer edge there. There is a really nice selection of yellows in this set, and I thought it'd be really pretty if she had a yellow coat to go with her purple dress. Maybe it's a raincoat, maybe it's a blazer, probably a blazer, but I thought those colors just look so nice and vibrant together. And for shading, I actually used this color called Pale Olive, because I thought with it like kind of bouncing off the color of her dress, the shadows wouldn't be really vibrant, and that kind of dulled down olivey color would give me a nice shadow, and it did. Those colors really worked well together. It's really fun to experiment too. I've always loved fashion. I've always loved sewing too. I don't sew that much. I mostly just mend nowadays, but I always love just mixing colors and mixing pieces together in outfits. And when you're doing this in your artwork, it's so fun, and really the sky's the limit. You could, you know, you'd never be able to afford to go out and, you know, buy a zillion different clothing pieces to try them together, but you can do it on paper and then maybe inspire some future outfits. I don't know. I'm just doing some simple coloring here for the skin. The skin tones blend so well in this set, or I should say the fair skin tones do. They're really, I feel like this set would be really well served to have some medium browns, kind of like some like browns that aren't that orangey, kind of in the mid-range, because there are some kind of reddish browns in the mid-range, but that's kind of tough to work with for skin color. You definitely want to add some of your warm grays to it to tone down the orange a bit, or even cool grays if it's really, really orangey. But I used those two colors I used in the lady in the pink dress, that kind of tan and that baby skin white color to blend her color out. I want her to have red hair, like kind of an auburn, so I used one of those browns, and I used some of this kind of auburn looking red in there. It's the same red I used on the lady in the green dress, but I highlighted her hair so it would look a little bit more red. I highlighted it with like a yellow ochre, and I just used brown for the darker tones in the woman in the blue kind of periwinkle dress. And I like the variety that you can get by mixing and matching your colors, because when you're working with a limited amount of colors, definitely layering is going to be your friend, because it will unify tones that don't quite match perfectly. So if you color everything one shade and then you layer on a few colors, because you colored everything in that one shade and markers are transparent, you are going to harmonize all those colors, and it's not going to be that apparent that you don't have like 3 colors of the same family right next to each other, like you might get if you had like the whole 350 colors of Copic markers. It gives you a lot more flexibility with the supplies you have. And it's also really handy if you have a set like this that you're traveling with. You don't have to have every color. You can make those colors work by layering up and by using your grays. Now for this lady, I decided I would make her probably the fairest of them all, or the palest of them all, I should say. And I used a warm gray 01 for the shadows, and I used the baby skin white for her skin tone, and that just really worked well. I wish I kind of thought to use the grays a little earlier on in this project, because I think it would have given me a lot more depth onto the complexions. I do recommend, if you're going to use grays on skin tones like those, that you use the warm grays and then you put them first and then you layer over them so they don't become dominant or they don't push the other colors out of the way. So for contrast, I'm using some cool grays here. I've got cool gray 01, and I am using that for the shadow on the ground, and that's really going to make them stand out because their skin tones are warm, and most of their, well, a lot of the dresses have kind of warm undertones too, so that's just going to kind of break them apart. I just think they look like they're at a party, you know? Don't they look fun? Oh my gosh, I just love it. So the next thing that I did was just crop this down on my paper trimmer. I cropped it to 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 so I could mount it on a 5x7 card. I did grab some, use the bullet tip on the Cool Gray 03 color just to give a little bit more shadow because I thought it was kind of, it was too light, and then I blended it out with the Cool Gray 01 again just so it wouldn't be too harsh. Now I love this trick for like if you don't want to use pattern paper but you want to add some pattern to the design, and what I'm doing here is I'm stamping all over this card using clear ink, and this is Versamark ink, which is just kind of like a clear sticky ink. And then you can use whatever blending tool you like and some chalk, and you can just rub the chalk in the background. I'm using a metallic like pearlized chalk. These are the Jane Davenport palette pastels, and then I switched to a sponge just because I wanted to cover a little more space. But the nice thing is that chalk is only going to stick to where you stamped, so you don't have to mask, you don't have to worry about anything that you've already colored. You just stamp right over it with a clear ink, and then you only apply the chalk to where your ink is. And then any of that you can probably see the shiny lines on the dresses where that ink is still wet. That's going to dry and you're not going to see that. If you accidentally get some chalk on top of the ladies there, just go in with a small eraser. I like the skinny one by, I think it's by Tombow. You can get refills for it. It's just a skinny little eraser, and you can go in and you can erase any wayward chalk, and then you won't see those lines once the card dries, which is really, really nice. I thought I'd add some more stamping here, and I just had this kind of sewing measuring tape stamp, and I stamped that down at the bottom of my card, and then I had this like pattern number and a little like 60-cent thing. I thought that would be really cute to stamp up top. And I did add a little highlighting with some white pencil, and I added a little more shadow under the feet with a gray Prismacolor pencil just to give it a little bit more depth. And I'm inking the edges, and this was a little scary to do because I was like, oh, I hope I don't drop my ink pad and wreck this card because I've done that before, but all was well. And I really didn't feel like it needed much for embellishments after this, but any sewing notions that you have would make really pretty embellishments, such as ribbons or buttons or tags, fabric labels, anything like that would make really cute embellishments if you did want to go further with your card. I think it's darling just the way it is, and it would mail so well because it's nice and flat. I hope you enjoyed this and you check out our sponsor Bienyo, and if you're looking for markers, make sure you check out their lightning deal they're going to have on Amazon on February 5th. I'll put details in the video description. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.